It's what I was saying this morning about the dishwasher tablet dilemma that I had in Tesco. And it sounds kind of almost incidental, but there was a point, there was a wider point in it, thinking, firstly, how does this cost that much? Yes, of course I can afford it. I can afford to buy several bags of it. That's not the point. It's not the point that that last texter was making either. It's not about affordability.
Britain's economic crossroads.
You think about your future.
Rachel Reeves' £30 billion
position where,
Welcome back to British News Blog. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to tell you is going to fundamentally change how you view British politics and your wallet. Trust me, you'll want to be here for what's coming next. Let me paint you a picture. It's late evening in Westminster. The lights are burning in number 11 Downing Street. And Rachel Reeves sits at her desk facing a problem that would make any chancellor's blood run cold. A £30 billion black hole. Not a typo. £30 billion. That's the kind of deficit that doesn't just appear overnight. Yet here we are, less than a year into a Labour government that promised stability, promised not to touch your income tax, promised not to raid the pockets of working people. And now, now those promises are looking rather fragile, aren't they? The whispers started quietly, as they always do in Westminster. Corridors conversations between advisors, carefully worded briefings to trusted journalists, and then suddenly it's out there in black and white. Rachel Reeves is considering something that hasn't been done since Dennis Healey in the 1970s. She's contemplating breaking Labour's manifesto commitment and raising income tax, the main rate, the one that hits employees directly, the one Labour swore on their political lives they wouldn't touch. Now, before you think this is just another broken promise from another politician, let's be clear about what we're discussing here. This isn't some minor adjustment to capital gains tax or tweak to inheritance thresholds that only affects the wealthy. This is a fundamental breach of trust with the electorate, and it's happening because the numbers simply don't add up. The Treasury insiders are talking about a 1p increase on the main income tax rate. Sounds modest, doesn't it? Just 1 penny. But that 1 penny would raise approximately £8 billion. Still nowhere near enough to plug that £30 billion chasm, by the way. But it's a start. And make sure you stay subscribed, because the implications of this decision are going to ripple through British politics for years to come. Here's where it gets particularly fascinating. And I do love a good political irony. Labour fought the last election on a crystal clear promise. No increases to income tax, national insurance, or VAT. They put it in their manifesto. They repeated it at every campaign stop. So Keir Starmer looked directly into cameras and promised not to raise taxes on working people. It was their shield against conservative attacks. Their proof that they were fiscally responsible, that they could be trusted with the economy. Fast forward to today, and that shield is looking decidedly flimsy. The Chancellor is caught in what can only be described as an economic vice. On one side, she's got fiscal rules she's described as ironclad. Ironclad, ladies and gentlemen. That's not wishy-washy political language. That's a commitment. On the other side, she's facing growth figures that are disappointing at best, catastrophic at worst. Welfare reforms that were supposed to save money have been reversed. The economic headwinds are stronger than anyone anticipated. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Reeves is to find tens of billions of pounds while maintaining public services and not completely destroying her party's credibility. Now prominent economists, and these aren't just any economists, but people who've advised governments of all colours, are saying something rather damning. They are arguing that a series of small tax raids, the kind of nibbling around the edges that politicians love because they think we won't notice, will actually be more economically damaging than just biting the bullet and raising the main taxes. It's rather like trying to fix a sinking ship with a teaspoon instead of a proper pump. Sure, you're doing something, but you're still going to end up underwater. The political calculation here is absolutely brutal. If you're Rachel Reeves right now, you're lying awake at night weighing impossible options. Break the manifesto pledge on income tax, and you hand the Conservatives and Reform UK a weapon they'll wield with absolute glee until the next election. Keep the pledge, and you either break your fiscal rules or you slash public services so hard that Labour's entire reason for existing comes into question.
What a civilized world.
Meet Hard Place. Where hit that subscribe button if you want to understand where British politics is really heading. Because the mainstream media won't tell you this part. Treasury sources have been remarkably cagey, which in Westminster speak means they're absolutely considering it, but don't want to say so until they have to. They keep insisting that Labour's manifesto pledge stands, which is technically true right up until the moment it doesn't. It's the political equivalent of saying the Titanic is unsinkable right up until you tread in water. Two Treasury sources told reporters that the pledge stands. But notice what they didn't say. They didn't say Rachel Reeves wasn't having discussions about breaking it. They didn't deny the conversations were happening. They just said the pledge currently stands, which is about as reassuring as a chocolate teapot. The really intriguing bit, and this is where it gets deliciously complex, is the internal debate about headroom. For those not versed in Treasury jargon, headroom is essentially the financial cushion the government maintains in case something unexpected happens. Wars, pandemics, economic shocks, that sort of thing. Reeves is reportedly planning to increase this headroom from the previous £9.9 billion to something substantially higher. Sensible, you might think. Better to be prepared. Except here's the catch. The more headroom you want, the more money you need to fund, and the more likely it becomes that income tax has to rise. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy wrapped in fiscal prudence. And the government's defense. This is rather good. They are blaming everyone and everything. Donald Trump's tariffs, Brexit, the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza. It's the economic equivalent of the dog ate my homework except on a national scale. Now, to be fair, some of these factors are genuinely problematic. Tariffs do affect trade. Wars do create economic uncertainty. But let's not pretend Labour didn't know these challenges existed when they were making those bold manifesto promises. The geopolitical situation wasn't exactly stable last July. Make sure you're subscribed because we're going to track every single development of this story as it unfolds. Rachel Reeves has apparently convinced herself, or been convinced by advisors, that a one-time significant tax rate on incomes will be preferable to death by 1,000 cuts. The theory goes something like this. You take the political hit now. You raise income tax once. You generate enough revenue to avoid further increases for the rest of the parliament. And then you've got 3 or 4 years to restore public trust before facing the electorate again. It's not the worst strategy, politically speaking. Get the bad news out early. Hope voters have short memories. And pray you can point to improvements by election time. But here's where this strategy runs into a rather large obstacle called political reality. Labour's poll numbers against Reform UK are already concerning. Reform has maintained a double-digit lead over the government for months. Let that sink in. A party that's barely established is polling ahead of the governing party. Now imagine what happens when Nigel Farage gets to stand up and say Labour lied about taxes. Imagine the campaign videos. Imagine the social media posts. Rachel Reeves saying she won't raise income tax. Cut to Rachel Reeves raising income tax. It writes itself. And it gets worse. The May local elections are looming, and they are predicted to be an absolute bloodbath for Labour. MPs are privately admitting they expect reform to capture a substantial chunk of Labour's vote. These are marginal seats we're talking about. These are areas that should be safe Labour territory. If Reeves announces an income tax rise before those elections, she might as well hand reform the keys to dozens of council chambers. Subscribe now because understanding these political dynamics is crucial to understanding where Britain is heading. The technical question of whether this would actually work financially is almost beside the point now, but let's address it anyway. Raising £8 billion from a 1p income tax increase sounds significant until you remember that Reeves needs to find £30 billion. That's over 3 times as much, even if she raids incomes. Even if she increases the tax on the wealthy as she suggested by going after those with the broadest shoulders, even if she finds every possible revenue stream, she's still looking at either substantial spending cuts or breaking multiple fiscal rules. Some in the Treasury apparently believe that additional payroll taxes might be the only way forward. Payroll taxes, that means taxes on employment, on jobs, on the very thing Labour keeps saying it wants to protect for working people. The mental gymnastics required to square that circle while maintaining you're not targeting working people would win Olympic gold. What we're witnessing here is a chancellor discovering that opposition promises collide rather painfully with government reality. It's easy to promise you won't raise taxes when you're not the one who has to balance the books. It's considerably harder when you're sitting in number 11. The Office for Budget Responsibility is sending you projections that make for grim reading, and every spending department is demanding more money for the NHS, for schools, for defence, for everything. Keep watching British News Blog for analysis that cuts through the political spin. The really fascinating element that nobody's talking about enough is what this means for the Labour brand long term. Labour has spent decades trying to shake off the image of being the party that taxes and spends. Tony Blair managed it. Gordon Brown pushed the boundaries but largely held the line. Ed Miliband and Jeremy Corbyn were never trusted enough to get the chance. Keir Starmer won partially by convincing business in Middle England that Labour could be fiscally responsible. Breaking the income tax pledge doesn't just damage this government. It damages that entire reconstruction project. It hands the Conservatives a narrative for the next decade. Labour always breaks its promises. Labour always raids your wallet. Labour can't be trusted with the economy. And the sassy bit, the absolute cheek of it all is that Treasury sources are still maintaining that discussions might not be happening while simultaneously briefing journalists about the size of the tax rise being considered. They're telling us they're not telling us about the thing they're definitely telling us about. It's peak Westminster. It's the kind of thing that makes voters rightfully cynical about politics and politicians. The Office for Budget Responsibility is still apparently scoring some aspects of government policy. That's the official excuse for why no final decisions have been made. But let's be honest about what's really happening here. Reeves is testing the waters. She's seeing how the public reacts to these stories. She's gauging whether the political damage from breaking the pledge is survivable. She's counting the numbers in her parliamentary party to see how many rebels she might face. This is kite flying of the highest order. If you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? We're giving you the analysis the establishment doesn't want you to hear. What should trouble everyone, regardless of political persuasion, is the casual relationship with manifesto promises this implies. If Labour can simply decide that a crystal clear pledge not to raise income tax is negotiable when it becomes inconvenient, what other promises are actually just suggestions? The commitment to the triple lock on pensions, the promises on NHS funding, the pledges on education. Once you've established that manifesto commitments can be jettisoned when they become difficult, you've essentially told voters that campaign promises are meaningless. Dennis Healey raised income tax from 30 to 33% in the 1970s during a period of economic crisis that makes today look like a minor hiccup. Britain was facing inflation running into double digits, industrial action paralyzing the country, and an actual loan from the International Monetary Fund. Comparing today's challenges to that era is either historically illiterate or deliberately misleading. We're not in crisis. We're in difficult times, certainly, but there's a rather large difference. The question nobody in government wants to answer is this. If £30 billion is genuinely the black hole you need to fill, and income tax rises will only generate £8 billion, where's the other £22 billion coming from? Because the mathematics here don't work. Either the black hole isn't actually £30 billion, or income tax isn't rising by just 1p, or there are spending cuts coming that dwarf anything we've seen yet, or the fiscal rules are going to be quietly adjusted. Probably it's a combination of all four, dressed up in Treasury language designed to confuse rather than clarify. So here we are. Budget Day is November 26th. Mark your calendars. That's when we'll discover whether Rachel Reeves has the political courage to break her word to the electorate or whether she's found some accounting wizardry that squares this particular circle. Either way, British politics has reached a rather pivotal moment. This is what happens when promises meet reality, when opposition bravado meets government responsibility, when the electorate's expectations collide with economic constraints. Rachel Reeves might be contemplating the first income tax rise in half a century. But what she's really doing is gambling with Labour's credibility and her own political future. Subscribe to British News Blog right now because this story is far from over. We'll be tracking every development, every leak, every U-turn. The establishment won't give you this analysis. The mainstream media won't connect these dots. But we will. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's navigate this political minefield together. The budget is coming, and when it lands, you'll want to be informed, prepared, and ready to understand exactly what it means for your finances and your country. See you in the next one.